Alright guys, so last night we had the Super Tuesday primaries take place. And in the broad scope of things, I think that this kind of went how most people thought that it was going to go, with Trump and Biden both sweeping almost everything. Now you'll notice that I said almost because both of them actually did lose one of their primary states, so we'll get into that. We're also going to get into some pretty major warning signs, just showing us how weak both of these candidates are going into what is likely going to be the 2024 November matchup with Trump and Biden. It's not a competition, a head-to-head of two heavy hitters. It's basically just a competition of which candidate has the most egregious flaws going for them as we get, closer and closer to that result. We also had two different candidates drop out of their respective primaries. So we got a lot to get into here. Let's just go ahead and jump into it. First off here, we have Nikki, as Trump calls her, Bird Brain Haley, who officially announced that she is dropping out of the primary. Let's go ahead and listen to a little bit of what she had to say last night, or actually this morning, because she did not endorse Donald Trump. Okay, she just dropped out and said basically good luck earning some of these voters. So let's watch a little bit of this.
In all likelihood, Donald Trump will be the Republican nominee when our party convention meets in July. I congratulate him and wish him well. I wish anyone well who would be America's president. Our country is too precious to let our differences divide us. I have always been a conservative Republican and always supported the Republican nominee. But on this question, as she did on so many others, Margaret Thatcher provided some good advice when she said, quote, "Never just follow the crowd. Always make up your own mind." It is now up to Donald Trump to earn the votes of those in our party and beyond it who did not support him. And I hope he does that. At its best, politics is about bringing people into your cause, not turning them away. And our conservative cause badly needs more people. This is now his time for choosing.
Okay, so first off, if you ever find yourself quoting Margaret Thatcher, you've made a grave mistake. Okay, there's nothing Margaret Thatcher ever said or did that is redeemable or is something that we should try to emulate. So that's number one. Number two, again, obviously pretty notable that she's dropping out and conceding the primary to Trump, and then also basically again saying good luck trying to earn these voters. I'm not going to come out here and give you some like raving endorsement or something like that. So I don't know, maybe she took some of the campaign attacks against her from Trump personally. Maybe, she just doesn't think that he's the right guy. I don't know. But in terms of like their policies, it's not as if Donald Trump and Nikki Haley are different on that much. And if anything, with all of the disagreements that I have with Donald Trump and everything that he stands for, Nikki Haley is arguably worse on a ton of different issues, right? At least Trump has sort of like the political ability to recognize that like coming out and boldly and proudly being in favor of slashing programs like Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security, that's not popular. Nikki Haley is much more of a neocon when it comes to foreign policy and basically wants to get us into a war with Iran and China and maybe even Mexico to sprinkle it in there, and everybody that she could possibly imagine. So, on policies, she's kind of to the right of Trump on many different things. There's not that much daylight between them, but clearly, she has her issues with him. And so she's not endorsing. So it'll be interesting to see how Trump decides to try to reach out to her voters, because there was a significant chunk of her voter base that, according to the polling data, was basically saying that they're not big fans of Trump, right? That there is a low likelihood that there's going to be a ton of turnover from Nikki Haley to Trump voters. Now, when it gets down to voting day, are they going to stay home? Are they going to vote for Biden? Are they going to vote for RFK or some other third party? Who knows, right? They may, all end up voting for Donald Trump. So it's hard to say this far out of the election, right? But we also had a response here from Joe Biden in response to Nikki Haley's victory. And, classic Joe Biden here reaching across the aisle, my Republican friends, right? He praises her. He says it takes a lot of courage to run for president, especially in today's Republican Party, where few dare to speak the truth about Donald Trump. Nikki Haley was willing to speak the truth about Donald Trump, about the chaos that always follows him, about his inability to see right from wrong, and about his cowering before Vladimir Putin. So, I mean, listen, I don't know. If this is your attempt to sort of win over some Nikki Haley voters, I guess go for it. I mean, sure. But again, in terms of the actual underlying policies here, you can't say that Trump is a threat to the country, but not Nikki Haley. Because if their underlying policy matches up 99.9% and they just happen to disagree on maybe like directly trying to overthrow a democratic election, then, I mean, that is a significant difference, but it's not that much of a difference, right? So it's like, what do you actually stand for? What do you believe in? What are the policies that you're trying to accomplish? Because if you look at Joe Biden's platform from 2020, right, towards the beginning of his administration, Nikki Haley would not have supported him or stood by him on literally anything that he was running on, unless it's maybe giving more, Ukraine aid or something like that, or aid to Israel, right? Those would be about the only areas of overlap that they may have. So, it's classic Joe Biden here. I don't know that we would expect anything else. Now, here are the actual results from the primary. Again, Nikki Haley did have an upset here, although it doesn't really matter now that she's dropped out. Trump hasn't officially hit the delegate threshold that he needs to completely wrap up the primary, but with Nikki Haley, with Ron DeSantis, with Chris Christie, Vivek, all of the rest of them dropping out, it's a wrap at this point. She did get an upset here in Vermont, although as far as I understand it, this was an open primary, meaning that you could have had a lot of Democrats or like non-Trump supporters who basically decided, okay, the Democratic primary is pretty much a lock for Joe Biden in a state like Vermont, so I'm just going to go over and vote in the Republican primary for Nikki Haley as an anti-Trump vote. So she only won Vermont by like 3,000 votes. I think that would probably be covered by some of the crossover of Democrats who decided to vote in this Republican primary. So I don't know if that really says anything about Nikki Haley's strength in this primary. Although, to be fair, she did last a lot longer than I thought that she was going to, right? I didn't think that she was going to be the last one standing. I thought maybe it would be Trump and DeSantis at the end of the day, but she made it farther than anybody else, I guess, to her credit, right? Even though she was basically getting curb stomped in every single one of these different various elections so far. I mean, the only places that she ended up winning were Washington, D.C., which is kind of funny, again, because she is, as Trump would put it, as swampy as it gets, a full-blown neocon. Obviously, more establishment figures in the D.C. area would be fans of Nikki Haley, so she won there, and then she ended up winning, again, in an open, primary state like Vermont. So, with that being said, if you do look at the margins here, and this is where we get to one of Trump's weaknesses, because he's been very strong in the primary so far, but in terms of his weaknesses, right? So if you break it down, and I'm not going to go through every single state here, but if you look at the margin of victory here, in many of these states, it's gigantic, right? Okay, Trump won by like 50% here and 60% somewhere else and 20% here and whatever the case may be. Some of them were a lot closer, like a few of them came within like I think 15 percentage points. I'm not seeing it here, but anyways, if you actually compare the final results here in the gap between Trump and Nikki Haley versus what the polling data was expecting Trump to win by, he did basically underperform almost everywhere, right? So this was a thread here on Twitter from Aaron Fritchner, who was comparing the 538 average. In this example for Virginia, it was plus 49 for Trump. He ended up winning by 28, and that was repeated in a number of different states. So I think basically what you can take from that is, again, that Trump is very strong in the Republican primary, but he has massive glaring weaknesses when it comes to a general election. Because a lot of the people who are showing up to vote for Nikki Haley here, giving this outsized difference in what was expected from the polling versus what ended up happening, that could be a lot of people who, again, either flip to Joe Biden or stay home or vote independent, third party, against Donald Trump. So, there are definitely some warning signs there for Trump. Now, I do want to show you guys, there were a bunch of different clips that were floating around last night of Nikki Haley voters and Trump voters and, explanations that they were giving for why they liked their preferred candidate. This was one that kind of just stood out to me. Let's just go ahead and listen to Fox News here at a diner asking a Republican woman in Texas that Trump overwhelmingly won why she doesn't like Nikki Haley.
NBC just reported that Michelle Obama has said she will not run for president.
Thank God.
Okay.
Yes.
Ainsley said, I would love the reaction from a woman in the crowd. And
I wouldn't vote for a woman, and especially, Nikki Haley, I'm just going to say this. She's probably menopausal. We don't need that.
Okay. She said, how about we vote for people regardless of their gender, just the right person for the job for America?
Okay. I mean, what are we supposed to do with that, guys? I don't even know how to respond to that. She's probably menopausal. I mean, if that's how you want to choose your candidates, go for it, sure. There was another person that was interviewed, I think it was also on Fox News, maybe it was MSNBC, but regardless, who basically said that, he wouldn't support Nikki Haley and I'm not kidding here, guys, because she doesn't have balls to scratch. That was his explanation, right? There were other people who came out and said, oh, she's just completely irrelevant, we're staying behind Trump, whatever the case may be. It's silly, it's stupid. Maybe this is how some people choose their preferred political candidates, I guess, whether or not somebody is menopausal or has a set of balls to scratch. That's what we need in our president, I guess, right? And so now we move on to the Democratic primary, okay? So the big news, I guess if you want to call it big news, is that Dean Phillips is dropping out of the Democratic primary. Now, Dean, to me at least, kind of came out of nowhere, throwing his hat in the ring. This is a guy who is independently wealthy. He's got a bunch of money. He doesn't really need to worry about his career in Congress. And, to his credit, he basically did light his political career on fire to challenge Joe Biden. Now, we had him on Breaking Points. I've seen many different interviews with him before. And, he was willing to come out and state the obvious truth that I think a vast majority of the country recognizes, which is that, yes, Joe Biden is appearing by the day more and more senile. And a vast majority of the country thinks that he's too old or thinks that he's mentally not there enough to be able to be the president. So he was willing to call him out on that. I think there are some issues that Dean is likely to the left of Biden on. Israel is not one of those issues. He's basically, virtually, except for maybe some of his rhetoric, in lockstep with Biden's approach there. So, he wasn't my candidate. He wasn't my kind of candidate. He's no Bernie Sanders, right? He's no Marianne Williamson, for example. But, he did what he did. And he actually had somewhat of a showing in a lot of these primaries, 3%, 5%. I think in some places it was upwards of like 8%. So, he's decided to drop out. Now, I don't know how much of an impact this is going to have moving forward. Again, Biden won almost every single primary. So, unfortunately, we're just in a situation where Democrats are forcing through an incredibly weak candidate against what they describe as the most dangerous threat in the modern history of this country, and Donald Trump and his threat to democracy and his authoritarian tendencies and all of that, which I agree with many of those criticisms of Trump. But then the question is, why would you risk, running such a weak candidate like Joe Biden against that massive threat there, right? And, Dean Phillips is kind of just like one of those generic Democrats who, if you look at the actual polling data, and this goes both ways, by the way, right? If you put up like a generic Democrat against Donald Trump, then the generic Democrat blows him out of the water. If you put up a generic Republican against Joe Biden, the generic Republican blows him out of the water. So that's what I was talking about earlier when I say they're both terrible candidates. They're both historically weak candidates. And it's just like, who can run to the bottom faster than the other, and that's going to be the person who ends up losing the election, right? And so Democrats could have had an opportunity to put somebody in like Dean Phillips, or, at this point, I don't even know if Kamala Harris would be better than Joe Biden as a candidate. I never would have thought that I would be saying that. But at this point, you guys tell me, would substituting Joe Biden for Kamala Harris actually be a better play for Democrats? At this point, I'm almost like 50-50, okay? Because Joe Biden is coasting towards getting obliterated in 2024. But they could also substitute even guys that I'm not a fan of, right? Like Gavin Newsom. Or like Andy Beshear, Josh Shapiro, some random generic Democrat, right? And they would probably do better than Joe Biden would against Trump. But they're refusing. They're insisting on sticking with Biden, okay? And so I also wanted to point this out from Crystal. Super Tuesday states with the largest anti-Biden protest vote. So obviously we talked about in Michigan, there was that massive showing for the uncommitted vote. Over 100,000 people voted uncommitted against Joe Biden. And, that's getting close just by itself to the threshold of 150,000 that Joe Biden beat Trump by in Michigan in the 2020 election. That's a state that he has to win for 2024, basically, right? There are so many different swing states that Biden ended up winning in 2020 because people were so fed up with Trump. States like Georgia, states like Michigan and Pennsylvania and whatever the case may be. Those are all states that he basically has to sweep right now. He can only lose like 2 or 3 of them before the math works out in Trump's favor and he gets to 270 and wins the election. So you need all of these different states. You need Michigan, you need Minnesota, right? You need Colorado, you need North Carolina to win these elections. And you look at the results here in Minnesota, this was the largest one that I saw from last night at least. And this is even a higher percentage than what we saw in Michigan. Keeping in mind, guys, that this uncommitted vote protest, okay, was not something that had like a months and months of planning and had all of this funding behind it. It was like $20,000 and like 2 weeks of people at a grassroots level planning this idea to vote uncommitted to protest Biden's policy in regards to Israel. And in Michigan, massive showing of 100,000. In Minnesota, it was 19% voted uncommitted, which is on top of 1% for Marianne and 8% for Dean. So these are also anti-Biden votes, obviously. I don't know how many of these people who voted for Dean, were specifically voting because of Israel policy. But the uncommitted, I mean, overwhelmingly, you could fairly say that this was because of Biden's Israel policy. And so this is, again, one of those states, man, like, you can't lose Minnesota. You can't lose Minnesota. And to turn around and to see so many Democrats who are tossing this aside as if this isn't an issue. 100,000 votes in Michigan, 19% in Minnesota, in North Carolina, 13%, Colorado, it was 8%, Massachusetts, 9%. Like, Massachusetts, that's a safe state. Some of these are actually safe states for Biden regardless, okay? But some of these are not safe states, Michigan especially. And this is something Biden absolutely has to grapple with. And hopefully this is just more and more evidence that the people who make up a large portion of Joe Biden's base of supporters are fucking fed up with him just outright supporting and endorsing and arming and funding a genocide. And I'll get to some polling on that just in 1 second here. So as pointed out by Waleed Shahid here, okay, a senior Democratic strategist, if you look in just Minnesota, the uncommitted vote just won 11 delegates. So they won some delegates as well in Michigan. And I think in a few other states as well during the Super Tuesday election last night. But you're going to end up with a situation where, at the DNC convention that's happening in Chicago later in the year, I think it's in, late October or late August, I think. And I may actually be going there to help with coverage for Breaking Point. So stay tuned on that. I may actually be on the ground at the DNC convention. But, anyways, you're going to have, dozens probably of delegates who are going there basically just as a protest of his Israel policy. So that'll be interesting to see. And I'm sure there are going to be tons of protests as well at the DNC, assuming that Joe Biden stays alive and that he is the candidate that they put forward there. And so again, the polling data. So this was a Politico article from yesterday. Majority of Biden voters oppose weapon shipments to Israel. Now, I did just see another update today, conveniently, that Joe Biden has been sort of like secretly behind the scenes approving millions and millions of dollars in weapon sales to Israel, doing exactly what a vast majority of his own base of supporters don't want him to do. Now, there was other polling data that I've referenced before and talked about before and shown you guys, showing that not only is it that the overwhelming majority of his base, of his voters, and of the American people want a ceasefire and are opposed to shipping more weapons to Israel, but even a majority of Democrats straight up believe that Israel is committing a genocide. Okay, now obviously I have my position on that because I understand what the standards are under the Genocide Convention, and I think that Israel has not only met those standards but blown completely past them for a while now. So I think they are objectively committing a genocide. But for a majority of Democrats to believe that Biden is essentially complicit in a genocide, how are people trying to make the argument that that's not an issue for him? Of course, it's not the only issue. There's the economy and immigration and other weaknesses that he has and other positives that he has. Abortion tends to be an issue that Democrats do better on, even though Joe Biden is incredibly weak on that. I talked about that yesterday. But this is a massive issue for him. I mean, a majority of his own party thinks that he's complicit in genocide, guys. That's nothing to just toss away. And I actually also saw, and maybe I should have brought up this clip, but I'll just talk about it now. I think it was Chris Murphy, okay, from, I believe, Connecticut, who was on MSNBC a couple of days ago. And he basically outright said that the issue of Israel, right, is too important of an issue for politicians like Biden or the Senate or the House to, make decisions based on polling. So in other words, he basically just came out and said, we are not making decisions based on what the American people want, which is no secret. We all understand how the U.S. government functions and works, right? But to just say that, to openly come out and admit, like, yeah, we recognize a vast majority of the country wants a ceasefire. They want us to end Israel's genocidal war on the people of Gaza. But this is such an important issue for us and our sort of like nebulous geopolitical calculations that we're just going to ignore the American people. And we're going to continue doing this. And the most ironic part about all of that is that even if you take Joe Biden's view of Israel, okay, and the geopolitical strategic interests of the U.S. empire in the Middle East, even if I am to put myself in the head of Joe Biden right now, this is still not a coherent strategy, okay? What Israel is doing right now, just completely obliterated the prospects of the normalization with countries like Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Bahrain, etc. Okay, which is one of the core tenets of Trump's Middle Eastern foreign policy, and also Joe Biden's that he continued afterwards. So you have this massive blowback in the region towards Israel, to where I don't know if this normalization approach with some of these surrounding countries is going to be on the table for the foreseeable future, to say the least. Okay, so you're actually like jeopardizing U.S. standing in the region. You are jeopardizing Israel's standing in the region by not holding them accountable, by not using the leverage that you have to rein them in. So it's a disaster, not just from like a socialist lefty perspective like me, it's a disaster even if you're looking at it from his perspective and what he says his goals are for the region. And so now I'm going to move on to this, because we're getting up here in the length of this video. California U.S. Senate primary election results, incredibly disappointing here. So Adam Schiff, this corporate sellout ghoul who was running in this primary against primarily Katie Porter and Barbara Lee, officially won the California U.S. primary. So the way that this works, it's an open primary, as they point out here. You can have Republicans, you can have Democrats all running against each other in the primary at the same time. And I think it's called like a jungle primary or something like that. But regardless, you have all of them that are on the same ballot, basically. And whoever the top two vote getters are, they're the ones who are then going to run head-to-head for the seat. Now, because Adam Schiff and this Republican Steve Garvey got the top two slots, that's who's going to be running against each other moving forward. So Adam Schiff is going to win the seat, if we're being real about it. This guy Steve Garvey doesn't have a chance. Maybe Steve Harvey would have a chance against Adam Schiff. I don't know. Maybe I would vote for Steve Harvey. I don't really know his politics, but Steve Garvey, he doesn't really have a chance. Adam Schiff is going to be the senator, and I don't know how old Adam Schiff is, but unfortunately, I think that this means we're going to be stuck with him for probably the next couple of decades. And really, the main lesson that I took away from this is like, I like Katie Porter in many circumstances. I really do like Barbara Lee. Okay, I would have voted, if I could vote in this primary, I would have voted for Barbara Lee. But the lesson here is, you guys who are the more lefty candidates in this race, one of you had to drop out. You had to work out some sort of deal behind the scenes. One of you had to drop out, endorse the other one, help them to campaign, because you had no other shot. Now, I mean, even if you look at the data here, I mean, Barbara Lee and Katie Porter put together had like 750,000 votes, 800,000 votes. So maybe that wouldn't have even worked. Maybe that wouldn't have even gotten them to the threshold. Although Ryan told a story today on Counterpoints, where he said he basically, and I'm paraphrasing here, had talked to somebody or heard from somebody who was a huge fan of Barbara Lee and had the ability to vote in this primary. And like days before, weeks before it was going to take place, he didn't even know that Barbara Lee was running for this position. So, I don't know, maybe there were some issues with their campaign strategy. There was definitely an issue with the more lefty candidate splitting the vote, and then the corporate candidate wins. There's a lot of lessons to be learned from this. One of the lessons that stuck out to me, is that Adam Schiff in this primary spent more money, apparently, on helping the Republican, Steve Harvey, I'll call him, because I'm going to keep messing that up. He spent more money on helping Steve Harvey than he did on his own campaign. So, I mean, it's like, it's giving me like flashbacks to 2016, like, and they didn't spend money directly on this necessarily. I mean, maybe they did, but like Hillary Clinton promoting Donald Trump, right? He's going to be the easiest candidate to beat, so I'm gonna bolster him, and then we're going to absolutely crush him, and then it backfires spectacularly, right? Now, again, Adam Schiff's going to win this election, but, $11 million Democrats spent, Adam Schiff and his allies, to elevate this GOP candidate. Why? Because Adam Schiff knows how this primary works, and he knows that if Steve Garvey comes in second place, which he did, then he doesn't have to run again against Katie Porter or Barbara Lee. So, really sleazy dirtbag tactics here from the Democratic Party, from Adam Schiff. Specifically so that they didn't have to run against progressive candidates. They wanted to run against a Republican. I mean, what a piece of shit. I mean, I don't know how else to frame that. Just a piece of shit is Adam Schiff. Spending millions of dollars to try to end the campaigns of fellow Democrats so that you don't have to run against them. Because you want to run against a Republican because that's easy in a state like California. It was so fucking pathetic. Now, thankfully, as we have been covering recently, there have been many different protests of a lot of these candidates, of a lot of these politicians, and Adam Schiff was not spared. Here he is being directly protested at his, I guess, acceptance speech or victory speech or whatever by ceasefire protesters. Let's go ahead and listen to this.
I want to thank you all.
Okay, so again, don't give them a single moment of peace. Okay, anybody who's not calling for a ceasefire at this point, a real ceasefire, not a humanitarian pause like Biden and Kamala are right now, anybody who's not calling for that real ceasefire or on halting weapons to Israel or even, doing what is the really morally just thing and the what should be the internationally recognized legal thing to do and actually going after and prosecuting a lot of these Israeli war criminals, anybody who's not calling for the bare minimum of a ceasefire at this point is fucking psychotic. I mean, I don't know how else to frame it, right? There's no way that you can look at what Israel has been doing and is doing inside of Gaza and think that this is on a trajectory of anything other than just famine and death and destruction for millions of people. So there you go. He was confronted, and that's a good thing. Now, my favorite part, a fun part to end off on here. The big man himself, the one we all know and love, because we all know who this guy is, right? The hero of the day, Jason Palmer. Jason Palmer, this guy. We all know him. According to results provided by Democratic Party in American Samoa, Jason Palmer has won the American Samoa Democratic Caucus. So this was, as far as I know, the only place that Joe Biden lost. Okay? Jason Palmer with the upset of all upsets, pulling off the dub here in American Samoa, defeating Joe Biden. We didn't know that this was the hero that we needed, but he came just in time. Okay? Jason Palmer for president. Now, in terms of how the fuck this actually happened, I mean, if you look at the results here, and I don't know the population of American Samoa, but I mean, it's not nothing, right? It's got to be, a significant amount of people. So I'm confused as to why in the Democratic primary, there was only less than 100 people voting. But that's what it looks like happened here. 99% of the expected votes are in. You had Dean Phillips here getting 0 votes. You had Joe Biden getting 40 votes, and then Jason Palmer got 51 votes. And a successful defeat of 56 to 44% over Joe Biden. So you might be saying, how the fuck did this happen? Well, this was a video. I don't know where this video came from, but this was, I guess, one of his selling pitches to the people of America Samoa in terms of why they should vote for him. This is just one of the best things I've ever seen. Let's watch it.
I'm asking for your support and vote and would love to talk to you about why I believe I'm the best candidate for American Samoa, a beautiful and diverse territory that needs much more attention and support from our federal government. You're probably wondering, who is this Jason Palmer? I've never heard of him before. Well, in the mainland, I'm actually very well known. I'm asking...
Okay, what is going on? First off, I love how he clearly has, it seems like no infrastructure surrounding this campaign. I mean, it almost looks like he just did it on a whim. He's recording off of a shitty computer webcam here that's somehow even worse than my $100 webcam that I use to record my videos. So he's recording in his home. It's bad quality. And then he says that even though you may not know who I am, on the mainland, the United States, the United States mainland, I'm actually really famous. I'm actually super popular. Everybody knows me over there, right? What is happening? What is happening? So, I mean, again, he won by 11 votes. 11 votes. So I don't know. I mean, maybe it's just because nobody's voting in this primary for some reason. But, I mean, even just the way that he phrased that, right? On the mainland, I'm super popular. He was talking as if people in American Samoa don't have the internet, that they can't look up who this guy is and whether or not he's actually popular in the US. I mean, in the mainland, you're talking as if it's the 1600s and the mainland is some faraway place that people will never visit. They don't get any communication from. We have the internet, dude. We know who you are now. At least now we know who you are. But people could just Google you and figure out whether or not you're actually popular in the U.S. Like, why is this? I'm so baffled by every single aspect of that. But good for him. He ended up giving Joe Biden his first L of this primary so far. So, I mean, again, listen, the broad scopes of this is that now we have Nikki Haley, Dean Phillips, both out of the race. The Republican primary is a wrap. It's Donald Trump. That's the candidate. The Democratic primary, unfortunately, is also a wrap. Joe Biden is the candidate. Now, granted, and this is not something to just toss out the window as if it has a 0% chance of happening, either one of these guys could just die. Okay, if we're being real about it, Trump or Biden, they're both up there in age. They're both, suffering from different various health complications. Either one of them could just drop dead in the next couple of months. That is entirely possible. Okay? You're trying to do, or in the case of Joe Biden, actively doing the most difficult job on the face of the planet. And so that's a possibility. So I do want to bring that up. But assuming neither of them do end up dying before the election, what it just looks like is that we're going to have Republicans who cannot escape Trump. It's a virtual total cult at this point surrounding him within that party. With Nikki Haley dropping out, it's a complete wrap. He's going to be the candidate. Joe Biden, Democrats, completely ignoring all of the major glaring red flags and warning signs that they have been getting, whether it's on Israel, whether it's on his age, whether it's on the economy, whether it's on any number of different issues. They're completely ignoring that, sticking their heads in the sand, pretending as if he's a fantastic candidate. And basically their only strategy for 2024 is just to try to remind people about how scary and bad Trump is. Which, I mean, don't get me wrong, Trump is scary and bad, sure. But is that really a winning strategy? Is that what we're going with here? As Joe Biden is refusing to campaign? I mean, this is a guy who's terrified of going on college campuses right now because he knows that he's going to be protested over his support for a genocide in Gaza. This is a guy who is facing, at this point, hundreds of thousands of votes against him in the primary for people voting uncommitted to protest his policy on that. I mean, this is a guy who a vast majority of the country thinks is too old or too senile to be the president. Joe Biden is trying to be the president for the next 5 years, guys. Okay, until 2028. Do we really think that he's capable of doing that? I don't think so. Now, granted, again, sure, you can make the argument Trump is worse. Sure, I agree with you. Trump is worse on virtually every single policy that I could possibly imagine. Okay, but in terms of a winning electoral strategy, at some point, either Democrats have to drop Joe Biden and allow, Gavin Newsom or Josh Shapiro or somebody else to step up and take the mantle from him, or dramatically change policy. You have to end the genocide in Gaza. You have to actually run on a big, bold agenda for 2024, not just saying the other guy is bad, or else it looks like we're just in the midst of watching a slow motion car crash where we have two candidates, both widely disliked, both widely terrible candidates who are basically just facing off to decide who's actually the most shitty at their core level, right? Who do the American people hate the least? That's going to be the winner for 2024.